Hello, and welcome to Learning Tree International's webinar entitled Pathways to Advancement in IT Leadership. As noted in the chat pod, all microphones are muted, and this webinar is coming to you over voice over IP. At the conclusion of the webinar, you will have an opportunity to post questions in the chat pod during the Q&A session. Today's webinar will be led by Learning Tree International's CEO, Richard Spires. Richard has more than 30 years experience in IT leadership, including serving as CIO at both the Department of Homeland Security and the IRS. Please join me in welcoming Richard as he unveils his top 10 characteristics and qualities that are key to advancement in IT leadership.
Hey, thank you, Jackie, for that introduction, and good morning to everybody. So a few months back, I was asked to do a presentation, a discussion around how to advance in IT and particularly in the leadership roles. And so I thought a lot about that. And just because I've been around a while, having 30 plus years in the business, I have a lot of people that ask me for advice or at least better understand what I've gone through, and in order to perhaps help them on their career journey. So in thinking about it, I thought, well, let me try to organize this and see if I can't come up with my top 10 ways to advance in IT leadership. And I want to say right off the top that these are my ways, and we all have our own individual journey through our career, and how one person defines success can be incredibly different than how another person defines success. As an example, I did not choose a path, even though I'm a technologist, but I did not choose a path where I just went right up just a technical track. I actually was a technologist by training, an engineer actually, but I ended up choosing a different path. But there are incredibly successful IT leaders that don't have anybody reporting to them. Okay, they're leaders in their field from a technology perspective or from a process perspective. So I want to be careful in that. I'm hoping that over the next hour, both in the presentation I make, in the Q&A session that we'll have at the end of this, that perhaps there's some learning or there's some insights that I give that might be of value to you. And if that's the case, then this time was well worth your while and well worth my while as well. So just want to start out by saying that while I'm not a huge believer in having to have a scripted plan, I will admit that it is good to kind of know where you're going. I always like this quote by Yogi Berra that you've got to be very careful you don't know where you're going because you may not get there. So if you have no sense of where you're trying to go from aspirationally, you're kind of on a wayward journey. So I do believe that it is important for you to have some aspirational goals, okay, but also to be flexible, and we'll talk more about that as we get into this. So let's start at the top 10. Number 10. I think this is really critical, particularly early in your career, and if you're in the IT field, and however you're in the IT field, become an expert at something. It could be a very, very narrow area, but become an expert for a couple of reasons. One, it builds respect, okay? It builds your brand, it builds your reputation in the field, but it also gives you a lot of perspective about the complexity of IT and the complexity of the technology, the complexity of the process disciplines, what it really takes to do things well in IT. And that's very, very valuable because if you do aspire to become a manager, a leader, a CIO someday, a CISO in the IT security area, having that perspective and an understanding of what true expertise is and understanding the complexity and how things really work in one area actually gives you great perspective in looking at other areas, even though you're not an expert in those areas. It gives you perspective. It gives you the right kinds of things to ask. It gives you, hey, that doesn't feel right. Let me dig into that area. We're not managing that effectively. Or we've got gaps in our skills in that area. It's obvious to me, even though I'm not an expert in an area. So I think becoming an expert in one thing at least, and if you're starting off early in your career, particularly important to do that. Even if you're mid-career, maybe it's a process area, maybe it's project management, okay, maybe it's service management, maybe it's enterprise architecture. By really understanding a process area in detail can also help you, particularly as you move into mid-career. Number 9, find a good mentor, and in reality, multiple mentors. This is an important one. We all have strengths and we all have weaknesses, and there are some people that are incredibly self-aware, how they come across to others, can correct those kinds of things, but many individuals, and I would put myself into this bucket, really struggle with that. I'm not as self-aware about how others perceive me. And I'm a technologist at heart, in a sense. Okay, I'm an engineer. And I don't want to overly generalize, but you're going to find a lot of people in technology fields that are perhaps not as socially adept as in other fields. But yet you got to work as a team. I mean, almost anything you do today in the IT field, you got to work as a team. And so being able to work in a social environment, being able to work well with others, being able to get things done with others, doesn't mean that everybody has to like you and the like, but being able to work in that environment and work well with others is critically important. And I found, at least in my career, that having good mentors that could tell me the truth, that could sit me down in a quiet place one-on-one and say, hey, Richard, here's the behavior I'm seeing from you. Here's how others are perceiving that behavior. Sometimes I'd be startled. I'd be like, wow, and I did not know that, had not thought of that. And so I think it's really important for you to have mentors and seek out people that obviously you trust, you respect, but you also admire the way that they can work with others and use them as a way to reflect back on you and ask them and say, hey, I'm looking for a mentor. I want somebody to be able to be truthful with me. Help me with this. Okay. And that to me has paid off many manifold dividends over the years for myself. Number 8, this is pretty specific. Successfully manage projects. Learn how to do that. Why? Well, think about IT, okay? You got your day-to-day operations, okay? This is what you do day in and day out to just keep the lights on, to keep the systems running, to keep the networks up and the like. That's kind of table stakes. But if you really want to be considered an IT leader over time, you actually got to deliver new value. You got to deliver new capabilities to the business, to your customers. How do you do that? Well, you might not call them projects. You might call them tasks, you might call them something else, but in the reality, in the vernacular that we're used to, you're delivering a project. And so I have found it's critically important for all IT professionals to know how to do this and to actually do it, not just talk about it. So, we're in the training business, right? We do certifications like PMI and Prince 2 and all these things. That's great. But there's nothing that replaces actual hands-on experience doing these things. And if you could actually deliver tasks early in your career, deliver projects, even deliver perhaps large-scale programs. I mean, my career arc was pretty much going through that. I mean, I ended up running the IRS's Business Systems Modernization Program. At the time, it was considered one of the largest, most complex IT programs ever undertaken, multi-billion-dollar program. How did I do that? How did I get that job? Well, it was because I had gone through this learning curve of delivering tasks and delivering projects and really understanding, failing at some things and learning from those and getting good at it. Now, that doesn't mean you have to be a project manager for life, but I think everybody in the IT field serving on project teams, getting this training, and actually strapping on and doing some projects somewhere in your career can be incredibly beneficial. You learn so much by doing it. Again, it gives you a tremendous amount of context to be able to understand what it takes to deliver new functionality for a client. Be a learner. and create a learning organization if you're running an organization. This is not rocket science, right? This field is changing so rapidly. It still feels to me like we're on an accelerating pace, and I've been doing this for 30 years. They continue to evolve. You will quickly be outdated if you don't keep your skills up and your understanding up. Doesn't mean you have to take training courses all the time, but really understanding what's going on in the industry, reaching out, understanding what the product vendors are doing, what the service providers are doing in that regard. In your particular area, trying to keep that expertise up. And I know it's harder many times as you become a manager. I would call myself a generalist now. I would not call myself an expert in any of these kinds of disciplines. But it is important that you as an individual continue to do that. But perhaps even more important, if you're running an organization, really work to build a culture that continuously evolves, okay, that really celebrates learning, that supports the IT individuals or other individuals in your organization in developing themselves. I think it goes a long way, not only for their own skills, but it goes a long way in building a very strong organization where you as a leader in that organization are well respected. Again, it's not so much about being liked, but it's about recognizing that others need to grow. And we'll come back to this idea of leadership a little bit later as well. Okay. Understanding your organization's business. What do I mean by that? So again, IT isn't there for just IT's sake. I mean, we don't do this. We don't run IT organizations. We don't do it just to get better at doing IT. We always have a customer, and whether you're in the private sector, whether you're in the government, other kinds of nonprofit organizations, really doesn't matter. You've got customers. And sometimes these customers vary widely, right? You might have individuals that all you're doing for them is kind of end user support, right? Supporting their desktops, supporting their ability to do basic types of IT capabilities on their desktop, all the way up to providing support to mission critical systems that are the lifeblood of a business. And if those systems go down, essentially that business immediately suffers. So you got a wide gamut, if you will, of customers typically in IT that you're supporting. And I have found that the most value, particularly as you rise in an organization, if you aspire to be that CIO someday, great, that's wonderful. If you aspire to be that CIO someday, what do you really want to be able to do? You want to be able to sit with the business leadership, up to and including the CEO of the company, up including to the agency head in the government. And you want to be able to be that liaison, that translator, that person that can really work with the business to help them both understand enough about IT so they can see the value of it, but also for you to be the facilitator so that they can get the most out of IT. All right. Now, you're not going to have all the good ideas yourself. That's not practical. But you should, through your team, okay, be able to really understand the business in enough detail that you can bring even transformational types of solutions to your customers. And I mean truly transformational, where you can truly, if you will, reimagine their business process through the right leverage of IT. And we see that all the time today, don't we, in truly disruptive kinds of companies and disruptive kinds of markets. And we all know them like the Ubers of the world. But that really is going across all kinds of business landscapes today, and even into the government sphere, public sector. So the true CIO, I believe today, the best CIOs I've ever seen are the ones that can be at that table with the business leadership and to really help them, okay, transform their business through the leverage of technology. And so that's why this is so important. That what really makes the difference. And And when you're at that level, your ability to do that, I think, is the huge difference between what I would consider a more traditional kind of IT manager or leader who's very good potentially at making sure all the systems are up, that things are doing well, making incremental improvements to systems that will help the business, versus a true IT leader that's helping that business or that agency transform. So critical today, and that's the true value of a great CIO in today's world. Protect against the downside. It's really something to see what's going on, right? But anymore, there really are no excuses. If there's a major cybersecurity breach and you're in a senior role, if you're the CIO, you're the CISO, that could kill your career. And we're seeing it now time and time again. And so if you're in that kind of role, you've got to really pay attention to this. And I appreciate there's no 100% guarantees, but what are you doing to ensure the organization's most critical data assets are protected? Particularly the data, the most critical data, and the systems from major outages. It really, I can't overstate how important this has become. So making sure that you have you're using good processes. I mean, that you're using a bona fide cybersecurity risk management process from NIST or others, that you're doing it well. That you really have got the right kinds of talents focused in these areas, that you're making prudent investments, and that you're working across, even up with the CEO, the head of the agency, sometimes even in the boardroom, to make sure that these threats and vulnerabilities are understood, and to make sure that you've got a detailed action plan to be able to address these kinds of threats. It's become so critical today for anybody that's dealing with any kind of set of systems, and particularly when you're dealing with very, very highly sensitive data assets. A lot of PII. I mean, you see the Target breach, you see the breaches, the Equifax breach. I mean, there's a great example of what not to do. I mean, think about Equifax. This is a company that was focused on data, right? Our data, our financial data, some of our most sensitive data as consumers, and they didn't even have the discipline to be able to be patching the operating systems across their servers and end user devices. That kills careers, and it has for some folks in Equifax, and it should have, in my view. I mean, that is just basic good IT management, good IT security management that wasn't being done. You can't find yourself in that position if you're in IT leadership role. Also, flipping, the other thing that can kill careers that I have seen, maybe not as public as the security breaches, but a major IT program debacle. If you're going through a major IT modernization and it really fails on your watch, again, this is another area that I have seen careers kind of killed. And why, going back to another one of mine, why is it so important to be able to know how to run projects? Because if you're the CIO, you're probably not the program manager of that IT modernization program, but it's under your purview. And being able to spot issues, being able to understand where things really are. So, having that awareness, having that expertise to be able to ensure that when you're going to go into large-scale IT modernizations, that you know how to do it effectively, that your organization is ready to do it, and so that you can do it well is very, very critical to your career. When you're at again, I'm focused here on IT leaders that are really running IT organizations themselves, such as a CIO, a CISO. Number 4, become a servant leader. I've been doing this for 30 plus years. I have found in my career there are different leadership styles, and maybe this is the one that suits me best. So I'll also buy that there may be other styles that suit others better. Again, mentors can help you with this. But I have found this to be a highly effective leadership style in IT organizations. Why? One, as a CIO or as an IT leader, I can't do it all myself. The complexity, right? There's way too much going on. I need good people under me. I need people that themselves are leaders. And how do I make that happen? And I have found if I take the attitude that a big part of my job, okay, is to make sure that those that report to me are successful, then that will make me successful and make the organization successful. And it doesn't mean that all I'm doing is just agreeing to what they want to do. That's not the point. The point is to help them grow. So me being a mentor, good mentor to them, being able to tell them the truth about the weaknesses I see there and what they should be doing to shore up those weaknesses. Being highly supportive of them, okay, in helping them grow. Really, particularly at a CIO level, protecting them in some ways, because these are hard jobs. I'll tell you, these are very hard jobs, and so it is. I think it's a critical aspect of running an IT organization, and of the leadership styles I have seen, I have found that a servant leadership style in this kind of environment has worked best. It's a classic book that I would refer you to. It's not very long, by Max De Pree, called Leadership is an Art. I think he does an excellent job in describing how to really become and serve as a servant leader. It's interesting that you don't even you can be a servant leader and not even have people report to you as well. Going back to that example, if what you want to do is become a leader in a technical area, you don't necessarily want to have people reporting to you, okay? But you want to be that expert for that organization. You may even want to be the expert in the field globally. That's great. I'd love to see that. But you can develop staff. You can develop others in the field. You can help them along their journey to become experts like yourself. And that's the essence as well of servant leadership from an indirect perspective, those that don't even report to you. And it is interesting when you see people like that, right? People that can command respect in an organization and have no one report to them. In some ways, I admire that a lot more than I admire even what I've been able to do, where I've got some cases I've had thousands, even tens of thousands of people report to me. But sometimes you run across that great leader that can really help drive an organization and do it all indirectly, do it just by the leadership style they have and get people to follow them and help people grow. Pretty amazing to watch. And so if you can aspire to that as well, it doesn't have to be about just managing people. Enjoy the ride. I see too many people that are just not happy in their jobs. They feel stuck. Maybe they're scared to step out and try something different. I get that. Been in their job a long time or been in their company a long time. But if you're not having fun, if you kind of lost the passion, first, shame on you. I mean, life's too short kind of thing. But even more important than that, from a leadership perspective, it's really, really hard to get excited to follow people that don't have the passion. And it shows, right? I mean, if you're not passionate about what you're doing, then it really does show. And so passion, I have found, really can be infectious, and for all different types of leadership styles. I mean, my personality, I'm an introvert by personality style. I'm not the most outgoing, gregarious kind of person. But I think most people would say, I'd hope they'd say that I got real passion for what I do. And it shows. And it shows maybe in different ways than a gregarious, outgoing person would show it. But that doesn't mean it isn't there. And people can see that. And so, boy, it makes it a lot easier lot easier if you have passion for what you're trying to do. Both passion for the job you're in today and passion for the career arc that you're on. If you have both, you're so much farther ahead and much more likely to have both a great career arc, but enjoy it along the way as you go. Number two, as I mentioned earlier, I think it is important that you know a destination. If you're early in your career and you aspire, you're in the IT field, but you do aspire to be able to manage things. I think it's great if you want to be a CIO, and I think it's great if you're 25 and you say that. There's nothing wrong with that. But you want to be careful. Don't get overly scripted on how you're going to get there, because there are many paths. And let me give you a story about myself that I hope illustrates this a bit. So I came out of an engineering background, as I mentioned, school, and I went to a company called SRA International. Ended up spending 16 years with them, and that's really where I developed my chops as a project and program manager from working my way up that side. Although did technology work early in my career. Moved out and became the president and COO of a product company, a software company, for a while. That company ended up getting sold, and so was kind of then looking around what I was going to do next, and got an invitation because I had some contacts at the IRS, and they were looking for someone to take over the Business Systems Modernization Program, which I mentioned earlier was this large-scale IT modernization program. And I had never thought about going into public service, certainly not at that point in my career. I was, I think, around 40 years old or so at that point. And yet here all of a sudden this opportunity popped up. And it was like, they offered me the job to take over this BSM program. And as I said, multi-billion-dollar program, very complex. It was a bit in trouble at that point. And I was like, wow, this was not at all what I expected to do next in my career. But I went for it. I decided, okay, I'm going to take this. I'm going to take this detour. It was, I won't say it was the hardest job I ever did, because the DHS CIO, which was the hardest job I ever had. But that was the best career decision I have made to date. By far, and didn't expect to go that route. It opened up, not only did it open up tremendous learning for me, I mean, I was able to bring all of my skills and abilities from having been that project and program manager before to the job, but it opened up a whole new world for me in some ways. Both running that program, I ultimately was asked to be the CIO at the IRS, and then ultimately asked to be the Deputy Commissioner for Operations at the IRS. So, surprise, surprise. But it really broadened my horizon in a way that I didn't even know. And so that's why I'm saying you don't just jump at an unconventional opportunity. You need to assess it. You need to really look at it. You got to see whether this is something that you think will really help you as in your own career. But also don't close yourself off to unconventional opportunities, because you might wake up one day with something and you go, wow, never thought about doing that. But let me study that. Maybe there is something here that I should really look at. So, I'm just saying, be flexible, be open to those things. Now, another learning here that I'll give you on this point. So I mentioned that I became the CIO of the IRS, and then I was actually asked to become the Deputy Commissioner for Operations. That becoming the Deputy Commissioner for Operations actually was a mistake on my part. I think I'm a good CIO. I mean, I'll give myself that credit. But the Deputy Commissioner for Operations was a different kind of job, and it got me into all kinds of other areas that I really didn't have the background in, and frankly, maybe I didn't have the passion for. So, I was asked to do it. I didn't seek it out. Someone left, the then Deputy Commissioner left, and they asked me to do it. and really wanted me to do it, and I decided to do it, and within 6 months I regretted that decision. So even though it was a promotion, and so you also want to be self-aware that way. And in fact, it was interesting. I did talk to some of my mentors, and I got some advice about, because I had trepidations about doing it. But it was a learning experience. So next time, if I'm in that kind of position, hopefully I'll be self-aware enough to recognize where my real wheelhouse is and what I should be taking on, and perhaps what I shouldn't be taking on, and where I can add the most value. And that's a big one for me, is where do I add the most value? Where can I add the most value for an organization? And then the number one, and to me, the thing that I always look for in people when I'm looking to build a team, is I'm looking for people of integrity. And how will I find that? Being a person of your word and being a person of truth. It's not easy. It's not always easy, but it's really important. And it's a reputation that you build or you don't build over time. And if you build it, then I have found that, again, it's something that can be incredibly meaningfully positive for you over time. I love this quote by M.H. McGee. Integrity is one of several paths. It distinguishes itself from the others because it is the right path and the only one upon which you will never get lost. And I won't give the details, but it has hurt me in the short term. I mean, I actually lost a job, an important job, because I would not compromise my integrity. And it was difficult. It was very difficult at that time, but I never regret that decision I made. And it's interesting, even up till today, and this happened years ago, sometimes people will run into me and say, I remember what that situation was, and you did the right thing. And that's pretty amazing that I still get that from individuals. So be a person of integrity. And obviously that goes for not just your work, but as a life lesson. And it may not always be the easiest path, but it's by far the best. So those are my top 10. And I'm hoping that, when you look at these, in some ways I've tried to organize them, not necessarily in priority order, but maybe a little bit in chronological order, from the standpoint of looking perhaps earlier in your career to later in your career. The idea of earlier in your career really becoming an expert at something in IT if you want to be in IT leadership. Lifelong, find good mentors, but particularly early in your career, really try to build a couple of good mentors that can speak truth to you. I can't overemphasize, if you learn how to manage projects successfully, that's a very, very valuable skill that you have and learning. Be a learner. Create a learning organization if you're in charge. If you move up and you're running an IT organization, if you want to truly deliver a lot of business value, a lot of value to your customers, learn their business. It's really important. You do have to protect yourself from the downside, particularly in today's cybersecurity world. It's really critically important that you protect yourself from the downside. I have found being a servant leader is best. I know there are different leadership styles. Work with your mentors. Maybe there's a different leadership style that will work with you if you're in a leadership role, but I would definitely study and understand what it means to be a servant leader. Please enjoy the ride, and if you're not enjoying what you're doing, do something else. I mean, you owe it to yourself. Be flexible on your journey. Know where you're trying to go, but be flexible, particularly when unconventional opportunities hit you. Study them, assess them, perhaps be open to them. And the number one is always be a person of integrity. So before we get to the Q&A, and I hope you'll stick around and ask me some questions or challenge me, or tell me what your top 10 are, or at least which ones I missed, so to speak. I'd like to turn it back over to Jackie. She'll just talk a little bit about, well, let me turn it over to, we don't have a slide on this, but Jackie, maybe you can just mention a little bit about our curriculum, particularly in the leadership and professional development arena.
Sure, thank you, Richard. We have a number of courses in our management and leadership curriculum. We have influence skills, we have personal skills for your professional development. We have emotional intelligence courses. A number of courses that can help you continue your journey along the leadership path. So please visit learningtree.com, our website. Management leadership curriculum courses are all listed there. And it looks like we are going to have a few questions, Richard. And please enter any questions you have in our chat pod. The first question we have coming to us, Richard, is you discussed having a destination, but being flexible on the journey. Can you further elaborate on your process for assessing taking on a role that at the moment does not fit what you had planned for your own career path?
Yeah, that's a good question, and and obviously there's no right or wrong answer to this. I have found, I go back to my own personal experience, right, and going into government. As I said, I always thought of myself as a business person and an IT professional, and so when that opportunity came up, I was like, okay, I'm asked to come in and run a large program. I had large program experience already. In fact, I'd done some major program work on Wall Street even. It was interesting that my thought process on this was, well, in some ways I felt like I was stepping back, in not size and scale and scope and complexity, but boy, I mean, I was on this track, I thought, to really step into maybe even running or being a COO of a company next, and a product. I mean, I was the president and COO of a company, small product company we had sold. So it was like kind of on that track. And boy, I was like, this would be a real diversion. But then I said, yeah, but think about what you want to be. I mean, I loved technology. I love to be able to deliver solutions for clients. And, I thought of myself as moving up this business track to do this. But then I thought, well, but wait a minute. If I could help the IRS improve their systems, is that not a similar type of thing, but in a different environment, in a public sector environment? So I got kind of comfortable that while it wasn't really the same track, it was parallel enough that it kind of made sense to me. And it wasn't lost on me that this is a high profile program. It was in trouble, and because of my background, I felt like I could really help. So you put those things together, and I think it really, if you will, set for me a context which I got more and more comfortable with it. One other point I make is a bit of a lesson learned. So I was always in this hard charging for close to 20 years at that point in my career in the private sector, and I step into government, and within 3 months, talking about mentors, my boss, who's the CIO at the IRS at the time, took me out to lunch, and he said, hey, Richard, I feel comfortable with you enough to tell you this, that the way you're behaving right now, you're going to be out of here within 2 or 3 months. You're going to be drummed out of this place. And I was like, stunned. I was like, wow. I mean, so what am I not doing? Because the program's in trouble. We got to move. We got to fix these things. I'm type A personality. And, I ran smack into the culture. And I don't mean just I'm using IRS as an example because that's where I worked, but different organizations have different cultures. And it was interesting because he said, well, I hear all that, but you also got to build a team and you got to bring people along. And it was a stunning kind of like, okay, not being self-aware. I mentioned that earlier. So, I stepped back, and interestingly, from that point, and recasting the way I was going to go about things and how I dealt with people and my expectations of how fast we could move. 2 years later, I was asked to, my then boss, that same gentleman, had decided for personal reasons to step out of the CIO role. I was asked to be the CIO of the IRS. So I went from almost being drummed out of the IRS to being asked to be the CIO of the IRS because I adapted myself to fit into the culture. Not one of my top 10, but just something that struck me that I thought I'd share with you since we have time about how important it is to be able to work and build a team within the environment that you're working in. Next question, if there are others.
Yes, the next question, Richard. Can you discuss a mistake you believe you made in your career and why? How does it relate to your top 10 list?
Okay, let's do this. So a mistake I made in my career. Well, since I did just talk about one, right, at the IRS and how I didn't come in with the right view of how to deal with culture. But let me continue on that. I would say this. Let me go back to this, being a good mentor. So I think early in my career, I did not reach out enough and build those kinds of mentorships. I mentioned this, the mentor, the CIO at the IRS, but I was 20 years into my career when I had that discussion, or he had that discussion with me. I came out of school, and had that, I won't say arrogance, that's probably overstated, but very confident in myself and my abilities, and been very good in school. And just not recognizing, again, not having that self-awareness. And I would have done better had I earlier in my career understood that and built and found mentors earlier. And then so I was going to say it was probably a good 5 to 10 years, not that I didn't do well, but probably 5 years before I started to really realize the value of having mentors that could really sit you down and give you those kinds of insights that are hard for you to see yourself. And so, I would say that was a mistake I made early in my career that I could have done better at.
We have another question, Richard. What mistakes, if any, do you see younger generations making in relation to your top 10 list?
Going back to the list again, and on a positive, I have found younger generations, that's not kind of answering the opposite. I have found younger generation people that I work with to be highly inquisitive, really want to learn. I guess I would say this, that it takes time and real energy to be an expert, right? And it doesn't happen in a year. I would say that if there's anything that I would perhaps, and I want to be careful because it sounds like a generalization, but I do feel like many younger people that I've worked with recently, there's an itchiness about them, right? About moving on to the next job. When I came out, now, and even then it was changing a lot from when my father came out of school. But when I came out of school, it wasn't expected that you would stay at a job only 2 years. Now, it wasn't expected you were going to stay your whole career at a job, but it certainly was expected that you were going to put in 4, 5, 6 years into your first job. And I think there's some value to that. from the standpoint of really focusing on an area, really getting expert at it. And I see a lot of younger people that, and it's kind of now accepted, right? That you go there for a year or two and you move on and you get other experiences. And I'm not trying to say that's not valuable as well, but in my top 10, I think really building expertise in an area, and that doesn't mean you have to take 10 years to do that, but really building some expertise in an area and spending 4 or 5 solid years in a particular area, they can be very valuable. I think a lot of younger people today are skipping that. Again, I'm generalizing, right? And I'm sure there are many exceptions. But I think today's generation, when you look at that, I think it's pretty valuable, as I say, to be that expert. So take the time, do that. There's plenty of other times. I mean, you spend 5 years at one place, really get that expertise. And then if you move to some other areas to get other experiences, that's just fine. Other questions?
The next question, Richard, how have you found your mentors in the past?
How have I found my mentors? Well, I can't say that I go into a new organization saying the first thing I'm going to do is try to find mentors. I think what I will say though is I'm drawn to people that I admire. I think most people are. So when I meet someone and I get to know them and I start to admire them and the way they work in particular and the way they deal with other people and the way they get things done, people are incredibly flattered to be asked to be a mentor. And they're incredibly flattered, actually. So, if you find someone that you really admire and that you think brings a different dimension than yourself, particularly if you're self-aware to know where your weaknesses are, and you find someone that you say, wow, that person is strong in an area that I feel I'm weak in, that's a really good individual to potentially be a mentor. And if you can cultivate at least a professional relationship with that individual, then you're in a position to ask them. And I said, I am incredibly, when individuals have asked me to be a mentor, I've been, and you want to do it. I mean, you just want to do it for them. Because they recognize in themselves that they need mentors and they've taken a positive step to get a mentor. So I don't think it's that hard, but as you get to know people that you admire, see if they bring things, different skills, different backgrounds, different abilities than your own. Those can be very good mentors for you.
The next question. I believe you mentioned earlier about the CIO of a tech organization should have a technical background. Can you expand on that a bit? What are some of the trappings when this isn't the case?
And if I misspoke, I didn't mean to. I don't think. I mean, I obviously had a technical background, so my ARC included that. I don't think you have to have a technical background today to be a good CIO. Now, that being said, I said be an expert at something, right? So, but there are process disciplines that I wouldn't call as technical in IT. There may even be things that you could be expert at that are tangential, if you will, to work directly IT that perhaps carry over. So I also said, if you recall, that that one of the most important things to being a CIO, in fact, the true differentiator between a great CIO and just a good one, I think, is really understanding your organization's business. That is really a non-technical discipline, right? So it is not the case that I would say that you have to have had an ARC that includes being a technologist to be a good CIO or a great CIO today. And in fact, I've worked with some CIOs that I think are excellent, that do not have technical backgrounds. I would say to you, it's probably easier in a sense that if you do have a technical background in IT, like computer science or some of the engineering disciplines related to IT, that it helps. But I don't think it's a prerequisite. And I didn't mean to imply that if I did. And by the way, if you were to be an expert in some business process of the organization that you're now on the IT side, that's some tremendous expertise that can be incredibly valuable to you as you work to, again, to be that liaison and to help bring technology solutions to help transform a business.
Okay, we have no further questions in the chat pod.
Okay.
So thank you, Richard. This concludes today's webinar. The webinar will be available in the coming days in an on-demand format on Learning Tree's website. So thank you all for attending today, and please join us in our next webinar. Thank you.